Everybody, thanks for watching. So now in this video, we're going to get into a couple of Stele, the Merneptah Stele and the Tel Dan Stele. Very important because a lot of people are confused when they research this stuff. Now, for the most part, what people do is they go ahead and Google the Tel Dan Stele or the Merneptah Stele, and Google will tell you plainly, yes, it is believed that this is true, and yes, scholars believe this is this. And yes, the Tel Dan Stele is proof of the existence of David, which is the one I hate the most, because that's crazy. So you will find exactly what you're looking for if you don't want to dig. It will tell you plain as day. It is proof. Now, common sense will tell you, how is the stela and this inscription that says the house of David proof that King David exists and everything in the Bible is true? How is that? But they immediately go to, it's proof, right? It's evidence, maybe, but it's not proof, but they will tell you it's proof. So we're going to get into this because this is what a lot of people use as their claim. And it's just, it's a haymaker. It's a wild swing. It's a shot in the dark. It has no legs to stand on when you really do the research behind this, which people are not doing. They are not looking at the criticism behind a lot of these things. And they're just not using critical thinking when it comes to this. So we're going to get into this because this is what they're using as their claim to Israel, as, them being in that land and being established for a long time. Because you got to look at the argument with the Palestinians and just look at the argument, period, as far as the validity of these Israelites in Israel, right? The land we call Canaan. And then you got to look at the history. And it's like, where did these people come from? Just out of nowhere, poof. And you have this history that is started, but they can never solidify their history with factual proof, right? It is not solidified. It is all over the place. And they're looking for any type of breadcrumb they can find or any stone to give validity to their existence, right? So we're going to get into this. Now, scholars are in agreement that small, agricultural settlements start popping up around this northern Israel area, right? So we have these small settlements popping up. These people were, moving around. They were nomads. You had nomads coming in and out of different areas. If you can imagine back then, you have people traveling in groups and they're setting up shop and then they're moving on, right? And they're leaving stuff behind. These are people who have an MO. They leave a marker that we can tell certain things that we find pertains to certain people, right? A certain look, people can tell. They documented these people. Now, they are in agreement on this, that these groups started to pop up. Now, what they want to say is we have to absolutely attribute these people to being the biblical Israelites. And it's like, how? So there's no evidence that they were the Israelites. So how are you going to just automatically out of nowhere say these people who we found evidence of were the biblical Jews, right? But we got to understand this area that they call Israel was, of course, inhabited by the Phoenician Canaanites, right? The Phoenician Canaanites was in Canaan. That's what, Canaan is about, the Canaanites. And these people were like merchants. They were travelers. They were traders. They were seafaring people. And they did a lot of trade with the Egyptians. The Egyptians was in and out their territory. They was in and out the Egyptian territory. And they was there. We know they were there. We can prove that the Phoenician Canaanites existed there. Now, according to the Bible, the Hebrews had many skirmishes with the Canaanites, right? They fought them a lot. And the Bible don't say Canaanite. They don't really get into Phoenician Canaanites so much because they don't want you to trace their history. So now the Phoenician Canaanites and the Canaanites are basically the same. And you have these repeated wars between them and the Hebrews, which there's absolutely no proof of. And when you understand the history of the Phoenician Canaanites, which we have documentation, we have proof of these people. I talked about them before. So at no point do they describe the Jews or the Israelites at all, right? So let's keep that on the table. Understand that this land was occupied by many people coming in and out, and the people who we can trace back are talked about by many different civilizations. We get the name Israel, right? First appearance of Israel, and it's Jacob. Jacob is wrestling, and some people say it's with an angel. Some people say it was with God because of what Israel supposedly mean. And he's wrestling with God, the story. And then, basically God says, your name is no longer Jacob. It is Israel because you wrestled against God and you have basically prevailed. And the Hebrew word they use in certain manuscripts is Yizra or Jizra, which means to prevail against or prevail over or to struggle against. And then you add the L at the end, which, L is God. So Israel, Israel, to struggle against God, right? So we know the Phoenicians, that's a Phoenician Canaanite word for God, is El. So, tie that in. So, again, it's just the story we have in the Bible. He wrestles with this dude, this man that comes out of nowhere. It's supposed to be one of the times that I talked about before where God comes down in the form of a man. He wrestles with him, and now your name is Israel, and then we get Israel. Even though they don't really refer to him as Israel, in the rest of the book, they're still calling him Jacob, in the book of Genesis. So we have this happen, and then, of course, we know Genesis 32:30, Jacob says, he called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, my life is preserved. And I've got into the whole thing, Peniel, what that means. It's giving you the hint right there. Peniel is God, the seed of God, all that. So we talked about all that, right? So you have this established history that you need to understand as far as with Israel, because that is what we need. That's what the whole Merneptah Stele is pertaining to, is supposedly say Israel. That's why I'm getting into this history in case you don't understand. So the Merneptah Stele is supposed to say Israel and everything. And, it is one of the things we have to look at and see, okay, if we can find anything pertaining to these people outside of biblical texts, biblical manuscripts, then it would give more validity to the story. But we don't find it. You only find it within the manuscript, right, within the story. And again, people who do a little bit of research on this see so many different things where they're confused about the word evidence. And I gave you guys information on that as well. Evidence does not mean proven or truth or fact. It just means evidence, right? Supporting evidence. Evidence is going to get you to the truth. Talked about that with the court of law. You got to have evidence. You can have a bunch of evidence, but you lose the case because it didn't hold up to scrutiny and cross-examination. Somebody proved you wrong, right? So evidence isn't everything. So when you read and doing the research on this, you're going to find a lot of evidence and them saying that it's evidence when it's not really evidence, right? It's some real final things you have to pay attention to that you can easily Google to get more information on this. And a lot of people don't know how to use Google, but a lot of people do. So I always use it so you guys can see exactly what you need to do and where you can go from there. So it says, this statement means that archaeologists haven't found physical evidence of the very first Israelite settlements. And because the earliest known historical reference to Israel, which is on the Merneptah Stele, only dates back to around 1209 BCE, current archaeological studies cannot be considered reliable for information about Israel before that time period. Think about that. Now they're talking about using this because where they found the Stele, or where they are believing the Israelites were at, they found no remains. They didn't find anything that would, say that these people was here. But again, if you do the wrong research, they'll say, well, this is proof they was there, and it's not proof. And, they haven't found anything. So it's also saying down here, lack of archaeological evidence. There's a gap in the archaeological record regarding the early, and we're going to get into archaeological record because that's important, regarding the early stages of Israelite settlement, meaning no clear physical remains have been discovered to prove their presence in the time before the Merneptah Stele. So again, without that Stele, they don't exist. So they need to keep harping on that Stele being some type of proof that they existed. Merneptah Stele as the earliest reference. The only documented evidence of Israel currently known is from the Merneptah Stele, an Egyptian inscription from around 1209 BCE. Reliability of archaeological studies. Since current archaeological research doesn't have evidence of Israel before 1209 BCE, it cannot be fully relied upon to provide information about earlier Israelite settlements, right? And if you play this game, if you understand, that's fine for them. That is fine for them. Long as they can say, or anybody says, that the Hebrews existed later than, after, the 2nd century BC, right? Because when you start doing the research, like I said, the Septuagint Greek, that's it. There's absolutely nothing. Everything they find is bogus, bullshit, controversial crap, right? And when you do your research, that's what you're going to run into. But you can very easily Google this stuff, and it'll tell you right there, yeah, this is proof. Yeah, this is evidence, but you got to know how to word it and put things correctly because they're not giving you the full truth. And people don't dig. They'll Google one thing and just leave it alone and think, okay, it's proof, and they'll go with that. You have to look at everything to understand what's really taking place. And common sense will just tell you that's not proof. Now, as I said, the Phoenician Canaanites, we know what's in that land. We know that land belonged to the Egyptian Empire, the land we call Israel. But when you go and look at maps, the maps will show you the Canaanite land, right? The territory, which encompasses what we know as Israel. But they'll also show you Israel, and they'll break it up, right? And it's confusing to a lot of people because they think it's two separate places. But Israel dips in and out of Canaanite territory, but it's basically still Canaanite territory, which was ancient Egyptian territory. I talked about this in Ancient History Volume 1, I believe it is, Ancient History Volume 1, when I got into the whole thing about Tyre and, the Greeks giving the Phoenicians their name, Phoenicians, talking about the Morak shell, the purple people, because of the Morak shell, when they went in the water to get that shell out, because it gave them that Tyrian dye. It's the royal dye that they use for the purple and scarlet for royalty, right? And they're known for that, the Phoenicians. So when they used to get in there and get those Morak shells out, they would be covered in that purple dye and it would be purple. So they call them purple people, right? Long story. But you have that history. So you have that history of these Phoenicians and people understanding who these Phoenicians is to the point where we can go in detail about purple dye and stuff like that. How is it that the Hebrews, the Israelites, had wars with these people and nobody never heard about it? Nobody talked about it. I mean, think about it. They had wars with these people and it was not written about. Nobody said nothing. The Phoenicians didn't say anything. They occupied supposedly the same land, but there's no evidence or nothing from the Phoenicians talking about a group of people called the Israelites, right? Who's walking around with the Ark of the Covenant in a damn tabernacle. Now, for those of us who do real actual research, you know about archaeological records, right? Because we have a record on every people that exists, and this is how it gets into the proven category. Understand? So just think about the archaeological record the same way you look at the empirical research. Because through empirical research is how we prove something is true. Through the archaeological record is how we prove something is true as well. So if you exist within the archaeological record where we can trace it back, we're talking about that encompasses not just artifacts, but bodies, right? Descriptive bodies that we can prove belong to a certain group of people, right? It encompasses a lot. But we don't find that when it comes to these Israelites. So I'm going to give you another easy one. It says here, the archaeological record is the physical evidence of past societies, including artifacts, bones, and other remains. It's a key concept in archaeology, which is the study of human history through the analysis of these remains, right? So it says here, archaeologists haven't found substantial remains of Israelites from the initial period, largely because during that time, the Israelites were likely nomadic and considered a small, marginalized group, making them difficult to identify in the archaeological record. Now, this is one of those things that I said, but you'll Google it and it'll give you some bullshit. First of all, one, the Israelites was not small, right? And you can look in the Bible where they tell you it was like supposedly 1 million of them. And you've seen all the depictions, like, look at this. So if these depictions are based on the Bible and how the Bible describes them existing in those numbers, there is no way nobody saw 1 million people walking with the Ark of the Covenant and a goddamn tabernacle, right? The stuff that makes up a tabernacle, whatever. We're talking about people carrying their entire civilization, right? So men, women, and children, almost 1 million people or more traveling. Somebody would have seen these people and documented these people, but we find nothing. People would have died along the way. We know about them splitting up and going to other places. There's nothing. We find nothing, right? What we find is bullshit artifacts that is never proven to pertain to them, that could pertain to anyone. It's never proven to pertain to the biblical Jews, the biblical Israelites. And in my earlier research, like this is something that I looked at because I had that mindset for a little bit, like, they found the Stele, like it had the name on it. And to me, I'm thinking it's going to be clear cut saying Israel to where it's not debated at all. But then it's like other things you got to look at and just like, okay, There's mystery surrounding it. There's a problem surrounding it. It's the way it was handled. It's the chalk they use. It's a lot of different things that come into play when you start studying it. And it's like, well, you know what? It's one of those things you got to go see for yourself. And a lot of the researchers and scholars recommend it because when you get up close on it, which we're going to get into this in a second, you can see what they're talking about. And when you start to understand the Egyptian hieroglyphs and how some of them look similar, you can understand what the problem was and what happened here. So yeah, when I went to go look at it, I got up close on it. I got to talk to people about it. I examined it. And luckily, they have the plexiglass over it, but you can get right up on it and you can look and really see the so-called inscription and really understand, what the stela talks about and what the people at the museum actually believe. But I'm going to get into what other researchers talk about because people keep saying that, oh, all scholars are in agreement. All scholars are in agreement. The scholars are never in agreement, right? It's certain people who they select and say that they're in agreement. And then when you read any type of archaeological work or any type of research, they'll say they're in agreement, but they're not in agreement. Like when you say they're in agreement, it's going to be something that you understand, and you don't need a video like this to get the information because it's going to be a consensus around it as far as proof, archaeological proof, and it's going to be undoubtable, right? This is not the case. And just the whole findings around it should be suspect to anybody anyway. So it says, error or forgery on the stele of Merneptah, known as Israel Stele. It says, the objective of this article are twofold. First of all, it presents one information omitted in chapter 11 of my last book in French language, The Lost Fresco and the Bible. Then it denounces an error or more probably the forgery of an archaeological document of the greatest importance, right? Let's get into this. Now it says here, line 27, the hieroglyphic reading of the word translated in Israel is, and this is going to be replete throughout here. I'm not going to keep saying it, but this is the word it's using because it's different words. And in my book, I largely extended on its meaning. I have demonstrated that IISIIRIAR is in fact an Egyptian sentence meaning those exalted because of their sin. Pharaohs Ramses II and Merneptah used this sentence when talking about the exiled Akhenaten followers forced to quit Egypt. The name of this people changed to Israel through the alteration of the letter R to I. It says, I had, however, omitted a detail discussed in this present article. It relates to the sentence Yenoam became non-existent, which directly precedes the mention IISIIRIAR, as I will show you it here. This translation is entirely false because it results from the falsification of one hieroglyph sign. To begin with, let us look at the transliteration on line 27 of the Stele, published in 1909. We notice that in the sentence Yenoam became non-existent, a group of hieroglyphs is not translated, but is marked SIC. The transcription of the hieroglyph represented by the bird vulture is thus doubtful. Just like the sentence Yenoam became non-existent, consequently, the significance of the remainder of the line, in particular the part comprising IISIIRIAR, Israel, is also doubtful. And you're going to see right here what it's talking about. And it says here the tracing with chalk. The engraving of the hieroglyphs on this stele is rather coarse. This explains why, since its discovery by Flinders Petire in 1896, one overtraced them with a chalk stick in order to highlight them and to facilitate their reading. Chalk tracing on the hieroglyphics of the line containing SIC photograph of the original, reading from right to left. The drawing with chalk of the vulture AA is precise. However, it carries the mention doubtful reading SIC. When I began the study of this stele at the end of the 90s, I wondered why this vulture transcription posed problem and was not translated. I did not find any answer in the literature, although there are nearly 200 articles published on the Israel stele. So understand what he's saying. They just skipped over this like it wasn't even there. They said nothing about this. During our last visit to the Cairo Museum, I had asked my son Ralph to photograph this particular part of the stele under the best possible conditions, by accentuating any contrast in order to visualize the true engraving of this hieroglyph SIC. Error or forgery. In the photograph below, one compares the letter AA, the vulture, in the upper line 26 marked A with the same letter in line 27 SIC marked B. Tracing with chalk of the hieroglyph AA in the upper line 26 and the one in line 27 containing SIC, photograph of the original reading from right to left. We notice that for the letter marked A, the white chalk drawing follows perfectly the engraving of the hieroglyph, the vulture. On the contrary, for the letter SIC marked B, the chalk drawing of the neck and the head of the vulture continues outside the carving. Thus, the engraving does not correspond to the letter AA. It is a forgery. Now let us look closer to the engraving of the letter marked B, SIC, and highlight in red the contour of the engraving in the letter SIC. Now, let us look closer to the engraving of the letter marked B, SIC, and highlight it in red the contour of the engraving of this letter SIC. The red contour of the engraving of the hieroglyph suggests that an owl, i.e. the letter M, and not the letter AA. We can now propose a reading of the missing word that was not translated until now. We read REMM, and we translate into tears. New reading and its consequences. The hieroglyphics group MTEMWUN may be separated in two parts due to the presence of the papyrus roller preceding the rabbit, WUN. The sentence genome became non-existent, is changed into what it says there, and the new translation suggests genome tears are finished existing the people. New translation of line 27 of the Merneptah Stele with highlighted punctuations, rectangle. And I highlighted up there, as you can see, they are very similar, the owl and the bird. All you have to do is, if you cut that head off, you can put whatever you want right there, or they'll basically look the same. The falsification of the letter M, owl, into the letter AA, vulture, was probably the effect of the discovery of the stele. Flinders Peters in 1896 from the beginning, he and his colleagues traced this hieroglyph with chalk in this way.